And yes.
Welcome to the Grassroots Army podcast. This platform is for common sense people looking for up-to-date, accurate, and truthful information without the hot garbage corporate media bias. The power of one can lead to the power of many. You never know what small act that you may say or do that may literally change the lives of millions tomorrow. And don't you ever think that you can't make a difference, because you can.
Good morning, my fellow Michiganders. Good morning, my fellow Americans. Welcome to the Grassroots Army podcast. I'm, of course, your host, Gary Soldado, and today I am honored to bring on my brother from another mother, Ian Murphy from the Iron Pig Smokehouse. And for those of you who have had your head buried in the sand over the last 5 years, he was one of the restaurants who refused to shut down. His story is amazing. He stood up when a lot of people did not for your constitutional freedoms, your sacred values, and citizens' rights. So we're going to talk about a lot of things today. We're going to talk about that little story along with Michigan politics, right, Ian?
Yeah, that's right, buddy.
Oh, so welcome to the show, my man. So I want to go back, all right, because I always like to start from the beginning, kind of like when this kind of narrative started to go forth, when the video from China came in that this virus is going to kill 10% of us, hundreds of millions of people. Where was your mentality leading up into this thing in February, March, and April of 2020?
Yeah, I was skeptical. I'm always a skeptic. I have been since a kid with anything the government does. But, when the first directives came out early on in March for restaurants and for businesses in general, I was really skeptical. They're saying it was highly contagious, very viral. And the way that we were going to stop it in restaurants was by not picking our noses, not putting our fingers in our eyes, covering our mouths when we cough, wearing a mask, staying 6 feet away. When I was reading these things from the governor, I was like, why are we not doing these things to begin with? Like, we shouldn't be picking our noses in restaurants or in public. We shouldn't be coughing, indiscriminately. So to me, it was just kind of like, okay, this thing's supposed to be so bad, but at the same time, I'm going to keep my restaurant open. And the best thing I can do is put a bandana on and say, don't pick your nose. So kind of just from the beginning, it was kind of like, this seems a little bit goofy, but again, we're good people. So we did, quote, the right thing. I have to put that in air quotes anymore. We did the right thing. We shut our restaurant down and did takeout only. And, we were the essential workers, and I wrote myself a note saying I'm an essential worker in case I get pulled over. I mean, it was really, really ludicrous, but it was, unprecedented times. So we kind of we went along with the narrative in the beginning. And then over the summertime, we really started to see that narrative sort of shifting and the attitudes of our customer base starting to change a little bit. And it wasn't so much about food and coming together and having a good meal and a good time, but it ended up becoming more about, well, who's not wearing a mask or who's not following rules or this, that, and the other. And we started to see it in customer comments online and here, there, and a lot of virtue signaling. That moniker became very popular early on, that the virtue signaling. So, again, we did the right thing, but we quickly saw that the turn was happening pretty fast.
Well, especially too, because to bring back all this stuff, it's kind of like post-traumatic stress when you start thinking about it, man. It always gives me a sick feeling in my stomach. But yeah, you're right. I mean, a lot of people, just trying to do the right thing in the beginning. But when things start to happen, when you saw Florida start to open up in early summer, people start doing some common sense things, just like you said, hey, don't spit in people's mouths. And we shouldn't be doing that anyways, right? But Then we have fall in 2020, and when most of the country, especially our neighboring states like Indiana and Ohio and Wisconsin, were starting to fully open, she brought the hammer down on us even more. And we predicted that, here comes flu season, right? So there's going to be more sickness. And what'd she do? I think she shut you guys down to 25% capacity with like a 10 p.m. curfew? Was that what it started to in the winter?
Ultimately, so one of the first things in the off season, so it's worth noting that the brilliant Michigan Supreme Court in October of 2020 knocked down the emergency powers of the governor as unconstitutional, saying basically she had way, way too much power with the law that was written back in whatever 38, or I can't keep these laws straight
35.
anymore. But yeah. And then immediately turned to the health department. 3 days later, they turned to the health department and issued these orders. And one of the first ones was the sign-in sheets.
Yeah.
And that's when I really knew that restaurants were being targeted, because I could walk into my hospital. In fact, I did walk into a hospital and they never took my name. I walked in and they just pointed to a board and said, "Do you have any of these symptoms?" And I'd be like, "No." And they would say, "Okay, here's a fresh mask." Then never took my name, never took my phone number, no contact tracing, none of that. So it took more information for you to come and dine in, or even just to walk into my restaurant to pick up to go, than it was to go into a hospital, which is obviously a vector of disease. So it was just, these things were just so incongruent across everything. And of course, you can go to Walmart and stand in line, but you can't come to the Iron Pig and stand in line to get food. It just didn't make any sense. And we started to see these things unravel. Like you said, other neighboring states were doing different things. Other states around the country were doing different things. Empirical evidence coming out of Florida was showing us way different results than the lockdown mentality that we had here in Michigan. So we just started to see things were really changing. And one of the biggest changes was restaurant workers were no longer essential employees. We were now looked at, in my view, and this was before I ever came out against any of the lockdowns. Customers just looked at restaurants and restaurant employees as the vector, as the reason, and it was perpetuated in the media with the curfews, like you mentioned, the limited capacity. We were really, really targeted, and the customer sentiment started to come around to that as well. And you start seeing more vitriol about employees not wearing masks, or restaurants not enforcing this order to the customer's level of acceptance, I guess is the easiest way to say it. I just merely chose at one point to say, to hell with it, and give our customers the option, give my employees the option. Instead of being forced to go on unemployment, we gave them the option to assess their own level of risk and say, do you feel comfortable in this environment? And we put a Facebook post out a week before we actually shut down, kind of asking people in this environment, given what we know now, 6, 8, 9 months on, would you folks feel comfortable still dining out given the current situation? And overwhelmingly, customers said, we do. We feel like we should have the choice to make our own decisions. And ultimately, I called the health department up in November, just before Thanksgiving, like the night before, which is one of the biggest bar nights of the year, if anybody doesn't know. And I said, hey, listen, you're painting us into a corner. And I think I'm going to have to open my restaurant up. We've got bills to pay. The utilities are threatening to shut us off if we don't pay. Insurance companies don't care that there's a pandemic going on, because insurance companies weren't held liable for anything. So it was just, we were painted into a corner. I let them know that. And their response was to show up a half an hour after we opened the next morning and serve me with a cease and desist, which we ultimately used against them, which we're still fighting in court to this day. We've got an appeal at the Court of Appeals level. Or I'm on the attack now, going after these statutes that they cited in this cease and desist, which is similar to the Emergency Powers of the Governor Act. It's just this broad sweeping power to, quote, limit the gathering of people for any purpose and may establish procedures. That is really wide, Garrett. Like, may establish procedures. That gave us the curfews, the masks, the social distancing stickers on the floor, all of this stuff. That is now actually unconstitutional. Here in Otsego County, they can never use that state health law and now also the local health law, which is almost the exact same thing, but it's a state law. So we've been fighting this for years. We basically lost our way to the top, is how I kind of tell everyone. We definitely don't have enough time to go through everything, but Liquor Commission suspended my license for 90 days. Department of Agriculture took my food license after I refused to capitulate for, I think, 10 days. We've battled MIOSHA. My local city council has come after me. They just wanted to go along with that hard and fast narrative and refused to consider any other avenue other than what the government was telling them. And that fundamentally just goes against everything that I was ever taught, which is to question your government.
100%. And here, number one, I didn't know you were still fighting a lot of these things from 4 years ago. And that's what people, it's kind of like running for politics, right? People, well, it's, hey, you need to run. And you're like, you don't realize the amount of sacrifice and money lost that happens when you do that. And the same thing, like when all this was going down, you need to stay open. And a lot of people are like, I don't want to because I'm going to have to fight this thing nonstop. And it takes a special kind of person, Ian. Like a lot of people would not do what you've done and what you continue to do. It's not that they're not brave. People are just not willing to do it. They're like, you know what? I'm just going to pick my battles and go fight another day. Let me ask you this, because that's astonishing to me. Because that means you're a part of the elite that will stand for something bigger than self no matter what. And we need great Americans like that to do that. Do you have any regrets, brother, about anything that you stood up for and what you continue to fight for?
That is a great question. And I've been asked that a couple of times. Generally, I don't have any regrets. If I had a slight inkling of a regret, it would probably be maybe some of the ways that I handled some of the vitriol that came my way via social media. We were review bombed.
Yeah.
I had two businesses at the time. I had a coffee shop a few doors down from our Main Street location here in Gaylord. If listeners don't know, we now have two locations in Gaylord, one on the south end of town, and our location that opened in 2017 on Main Street, which is where all this went down. My biggest regret really there is I probably could have handled that in a different way. But the reason why I say hesitate to really call that a regret is because so many people were sitting at home watching what was going on to the Iron Pig. And of course, I made it known that if you were going to come and leave a 1-star review after never visiting the restaurant, after never meeting me, after never talking to employees, there's fundamentally something wrong with you and not wrong with me. And I learned some things through that. But what we also garnered was a very interesting following of people that would get up in the morning and read the newest reviews of people trying to review bomb us and my responses. And we had a good time and very entertaining with just kind of poking back at these people. But ultimately, I have lost customers because moderate thinking people don't really understand how nasty some of these people were. And saying that they hope I get COVID, that I hope my restaurant gets shut down and I'm a terrible person and all of these things. You kind of have to have a sense of humor about it. You can't take these people that seriously. And I think at some point I did take them a little bit too seriously until I realized how absurd they actually are. And if I can really quickly, a very, very good friend of mine, this is when I realized some things were different. And it was a kind of a change in thinking for me. I was telling him about some of this stuff. I'm like, I don't understand these people that I've known for decades. They're so mad at me. They're so angry and they're so mean. I don't understand why they're so hateful. He says, Ian, they're not hateful. They're afraid. And I said, well, wait a minute. I thought it was love and hate. And he goes, no, actually, he goes, it's love and it's fear. Hate is a byproduct of fear. And I said, okay. And he said, well, if you can figure out what they're afraid of, then you'll understand why they're being so hateful. And what I ultimately figured out was the reason why they were so afraid or why they were so hateful is because they were afraid of everything that was going on. They didn't know. They saw me as somebody doing something different than the mainstream narrative that was out there that almost everybody else was going by in my world. So here's somebody that's going against the grain. So they've just been trained to think that this person has got to be bad. And ultimately, I don't want to say I was right because that's not what it's about. But ultimately, the entire scenario played out in our favor, whether it was somebody talking about vaccines or whether it was talking about where this virus came from or how it was transmitted or any of that. It's basically just all wrong. And so for us to stand on our principles, and I say us because it wasn't just me, it was me, my wife, my family, all of our employees that were here all stood behind this entire thing. So when I figured that out, that it was just they're afraid. And now I can just figure out what they're afraid of. I understand why they're so hateful. And that dynamic really changed things for me and kind of just propelled us forward and said, okay, we got to have a sense of humor about this kind of stuff. We came out with the Kiss Me I'm Contagious shirt for St. Patty's Day, which, caught me a bunch more flack. But again, it just reminds us we've got to laugh about these things. Yes, it's serious times. Yes, there are some people dying from this disease. But we've got to look back and we've got to have a little bit of brevity on the whole thing and realize that there's something bigger going on. We can't just go along. We've got to question some of these things.
Amen. And it's funny because like with the review bombs, I mean, they are nasty, and people don't understand too. Like some of these reviews, they last forever. Now, some of them you can get them taken down when you request they were never here and stuff. But some of them are out there. But once you defame a restaurant, I mean, we always look at reviews, and when you see all this stuff said about you, I mean, same thing. Like I'm a Nazi, I'm a pedophile. I mean, everything you can think of, and you're like, this is not good for my name in this town, right? And man, that was good advice. Where it was a good friend that said that to you.
Yeah, really good friend. He used to run a faith-based music festival here in town. Now he's in the tech space that we do some other stuff with. But just a brilliant piece of information and clarity that he gave me. And I try and tell it to everybody now that might be facing something similar to that. It's like, it's not hate, it's just fear. Just understand that.
Man, that's really good advice. I mean, that truly is. And he's spot on when you think about that. And you know what? I also found a lot of these people, I mean, they just sit on social media and they just vomit garbage any chance that they can get. But I always invite them on the show. And when they really start to troll me, I'm like, hey, why don't you come on the show and talk about it? And then we'll talk about your real name, because they always hide behind their handle, right? Yep. And they go dark immediately, because I'll have a conversation with anyone. I don't care. I'll ask the tough questions, and I'll stand for my principles, and I'll defend them. And I feel that everyone, if you believe that strongly, let me ask some questions of it. But they usually go dark with it. But that, I never heard it put that way. That's very true. That's very, very true. So I remember, I think it was December of 2020, I did a restaurant tour, and your restaurant was on it. It was the Iron Pig. It was Wood Chips Barbecue in Lapeer, Spangler's, I think, in Jonesville, Craven's Restaurant in Hudson, and Marlena's was a couple months later. I mean, there was only a few folks standing up against this. And do you know if they're still fighting? I haven't heard a lot about Marlena's Bistro. Are they still involved in lawsuits?
So Marlena's is a long story, but the easiest way that I can say that, she had terrible representation.
Yeah, I heard
she had a couple of different lawyers, but ultimately they were making the wrong arguments in the wrong venue. That's why I gave up against the Liquor Commission. I took the 90-day suspension. I didn't try and appeal that. I took the MDARD suspension. I didn't try and appeal that because it was all built on the health department's order. And that's ultimately what we challenged. There's enabling statutes that allow these other agencies, MAHA, to come after us, which they sent us a letter, but they never came after us because they knew, the state knew that MLCC, the Liquor Commission, those licenses are not easy to get. They're not cheap. You have to jump through a million hoops, and they don't give them out to everybody. On top of the fact, if you're arrested for serving alcohol without a liquor license, that's a felony. So if they take my liquor license and I continue to serve alcohol, my local chief of police or sheriff can come arrest me and charge me with a felony. Wow. Then they've really won, because I will never get my liquor license back. They threatened me with jail. So 10 days before Marlena was arrested, maybe it was about 2 weeks, my attorney received an email from the clerk from Ingham County. This was during my Department of Agriculture hearings. They said in an email, 10:30 at night, Judge Kennedy does reserve the right to impose fines and jail time if Mr. Murphy does not close his restaurant. So my attorney calls at 10:30, forwards me this email and says, listen, I think the best thing to do is probably to close a restaurant, because you can't fight this battle and you can't operate your restaurant from jail. So at 10:30 at night, I said, okay, we're going to pull the plug. They've won this one, but our fight was not with Department of Agriculture. It wasn't with the Liquor Commission. It wasn't with MAHA. It wasn't with the good people with the city council here in Gaylord. It was with Liz Hertel, Bob Gordon, Dana Nessel, and Gretchen Whitmer. That's who we wanted. So Marlena's case, they tried to go after MDARD and then made some arguments in the wrong venue. And unfortunately, so we tried to reach out to them early on. And I think at that time, her attorney probably wanted the notoriety that was coming along with Marlena being on Fox News and some of that other stuff. So ultimately, she lost. And I think the Court of Appeals, or Michigan Supreme Court, just recently turned down one of her appeals citing a lot of that stuff. And it's unfortunate because she had, in my opinion, a pretty darn good case, especially when the judge wouldn't even let her speak in her original hearing. She wasn't allowed to assert her Fifth Amendment right.
I remember that.
Yeah, and her attorney should have been there in that courtroom with her, not on a Zoom camera, all these things. So unfortunately, she's now dead in the water, so to speak.
Wow. I didn't know that too. Thanks for informing us of that situation. You know, like, so we fast forward, we get through the lockdowns. You're obviously still fighting. And then let's go to the present, like the shenanigans that are going on right now. I mean, the restaurants, especially, you guys just got hammered for years, right?
Yeah.
And now they're pushing all this the taxes, the vacation. I mean, all this stuff. They just, why do you think they have
cage-free
it out?
eggs?
Yeah, like, why do they have it out for restaurants? I don't get it.
Yeah, I can't. It's that there's so many facets to this one, Garrett. It boggles my mind, and it's hard not to think that they aren't targeting restaurants.
Yeah.
I don't think that they are. That seems so nonsensical and illogical to me. But there is definitely a concerted effort by organizations like the SEIU, unions, to, I believe, attempt to unionize restaurant workforce. I'm not an anti-union person per se. I'm an anti-force somebody to be part of a union. Both of my parents had been union members. One was a teacher, one was an electrical worker, union member. My thing is, if unions are so star-spangled awesome, why do they have to force somebody to be a part of them? That's kind of my thing. So that's where I'm at on unions. But I do believe there is an effort to try and get our workforce unionized. I haven't spoke to any operators that didn't think that the minimum wage needed to be increased or shouldn't have been increased. I mean, it was at it's been at $10. Go ahead and increase it. Most of us don't pay minimum wage in restaurants.
Yeah.
What most of us took issue with was the removal of the tip credit, right? So that's that sub minimum wage that we pay workers to incentivize good service. That's the easiest way to put it, right? So we had that coming down. We have paid sick leave, which is still a terrible piece of legislation. They did some fixes to it and put some caps on it here and there, but it's still awful. Our business, last I looked, was one of the top 5 industries with chronic absenteeism. This is not going to help us. We may have to hire another 20% workforce part-timers, essentially, to cover a call out on any given day. Thankfully, at the Iron Pig, most of our employees like to work, have bills to pay. So they make more money when they show up to work, the way that we have structured our compensation plan. But a lot of these things are just bad legislation. They're bad laws, right?
Yeah.
The petition that was adopted and then amended back in 2018 for the paid sick and the wage law and this stuff, the cage-free law that was enacted. These are all just barriers that they're putting in way of either the free market ecosystem and just businesses in general being able to make decisions for themselves. You know, we offer AFLAC policy. We pay for accident policies for all of our full-time workers. I know businesses that are cutting back on their PTO, their paid time off, because of this new mandate. So people are actually losing paid time off because of this new government mandate. I'm a small government, limited government, small L libertarian. Get out of our way. None of my employees asked for the tip credit to be removed. None of them asked for any of this. What they're asking for, let me do my job. Let me keep my income as much as I can, right? That's all that they're asking for. They're not asking for all this extra stuff. Now, I get it. Some people probably are. Some people probably are in the restaurant business. Remove the tip credit. I generally say those servers probably aren't the cream of the crop, because to me, it's about meritocracy. I know who the good servers are and aren't based on this system. And this is a system that we've had. And I know the vast majority of our customers like the tip system, like the tip credit. They love being able to give the amount of proper compensation for the service that they've been given, right? This is an experience when you come into our restaurant. Now, a lot of restaurateurs will say that, but everything that we're talking about in the last 20 minutes is an experience unlike any other. I have people coming into the restaurant every day that introduce themselves and say, thank you. Thank you for what you've done. I can't believe you stood up. I can't believe you fought back, blah, 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 all these things. I say blah, 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 not to be flippant, but because there's so much of it. And I adore it. We love it. And it's our entire ethos now. It's who we are.
Every
But
time
all
I
these-
come through Gaylord, baby, I stop by the Iron Pig.
And I love it. And that's exactly what we've received from all of this. And yeah, we still have haters, but those people just don't come into the restaurant. Like you said, you invite them on your podcast to have discussions. And I say the same thing. Well, if you just pay your employees a livable wage, and I'd say, well, come in and ask them that. Come in and ask them what they think of the paid sick, of this tip wage removal stuff.
Yeah.
They're not in favor. And of course, they never do.
Nope.
They never come and they never, oh, you're a terrible boss. And they never come and they never ask.
Nope.
Because they generally just don't care. Like you said, they just want to spout their ignorance.
And I see you defend that, like online, especially on X, with these people that don't know. They don't own their own business. They're not in the restaurant industry. And they just spew this kind of rhetoric that's been programmed. And you hit the nail on the head. Hey, come in and ask my employees. If they didn't want to work here, they'd go somewhere else.
Right. Exactly. And the other thing is, I say, Garrett, they cannot explain to me why I have 5 times more applications for a $4 an hour job than I do for a $20 an hour job. They do not understand how the meritocracy works. They just can't get over the idea of this subsidizing restaurant wages idea that we've all participated in for nearly our entire lives, except in a couple of states. But that's, again, the indoctrination, the ingrained idea of all of these things that they just turn around and they just verbatim spew out without ever having worked in a restaurant, ever having employed a single person, ever had the idea of investing their own hard-earned money into an enterprise, especially restaurants that have a very high failure rate anywhere in the nation, let alone Michigan. They just don't understand the hoops that are jumped through. And then they just automatically think we're all millionaires and billionaires.
Yep.
Like we're just rolling in the dough like Scrooge McDuck. Every morning I get up and I jump into my bin of coins. Like, this is just absurd that anybody, 40% of restaurants in Michigan right now are insolvent, which means they do not make money. So if you've got a restaurant that's not making money, what are you doing? You're borrowing money.
Yep.
So it's this vicious, endless cycle. Now you put on top all these regulations, the cage-free laws, the wage laws, the paid sick, all this stuff. And it's a really tough environment to work in. And I cannot believe that we've opened a new restaurant, given all of this nonsense. But Garrett, it's only because of standing up for principles and people like you that keep coming back to give us their business, because we took a principled stance, and because I reply the way that I do on reviews, and because I do have a big mouth and I'm not afraid to say what I'm thinking and all these other things. And some of that may be lost, and some of that may be trickle down effect from, politics at the federal level, where you have somebody like Donald Trump who entered the scene years ago saying kind of whatever he wanted. Now, I'm not exactly trying to compare myself to Donald Trump. That's just insane. But the idea is people want truth and honesty, and not this polished over nonsense that we seem to be getting from so many politicians these days.
You're right. I think people love him so much because he's relatable. They see themselves into him, and he says what's on his mind, which a lot of people hold back. And I got to tell you, man, every time I come through, and I think it's just the culture that you have created in your business, that you feel like a better American when you sit down in your place and you have a meal, which your food is fantastic, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
And it's like a rite of passage, man. And that's why it's like you make your pilgrimage to freedom, right? And I always say that, but it's true. Like when you go and like sit down and you understand, and it's like you're part of history. I mean, it really is. And a lot of people want to be a part of that. So, and I love what you're doing. And that's why I reached out to you, because I saw that you're kind of, evolving into the MAHA movement with your menu and stuff. Can we hit on some of that? What changes that you're making to your menu?
Yeah, so the nice thing is that barbecue is very simple, right? We're not getting ultra processed foods. It's all made from scratch. Our barbecue sauces are made from scratch. Everything we try to do is from a healthy standpoint. Um, so really, this is a journey, honestly, that started for me personally. Over a year ago, I went to my doctor and was like, I'm just not feeling great. I have some stomach problems. I'm just feeling sluggish, blah, blah. So we did some tests and endoscopy, some different things, and they really couldn't nail down any one thing specific. They did some blood work. They said, well, your blood work came back fine. Well, so I started personally digging into my blood work and actually looking at some of the metrics that were coming out in the blood panel. And I was starting to see some trends I didn't really like. I was malnourished, some other things, I iron deficiency, yada, yada, whatever. And I started to look at my diet and started really changing my diet. And in the restaurant business, yeah, I'm surrounded by food, but a lot of us and anybody in the restaurant business can tell you this. We eat on our feet a lot, mainly just because we don't have time to sit down. And the same can be said for what I'm actually eating. Now, I'm not saying that I can't eat in my restaurant every day. I love my food, but I've been eating too much pizza lately, is really what it is. But so, I love Firehouse subs,
Yeah.
all these things. So I really just kind of started looking at what I was eating, and I just wasn't eating as healthy as I should have been. And then I start hearing conversations about seed oils. And then I came across a great Joe Rogan podcast with Casey and Callie Means, Dr. Casey Means specifically. And they really talk about how awful our food supply, our food system, what we're eating, what we're giving to kids, and moreover, seed oils. And so I had already knew a little bit about this, but I've always wanted to try and change our fryer oil here in the restaurant. So a lot of restaurants use a soybean or a cottonseed blend with soybean, corn oil, all these, but they're all seed oils. And what I found out is that seed oils, for me, and turns out a lot of other people, cause a lot of inflammation in various ways. And I just decided that, you know what, if we're going to take this seriously, if we're going to feed people, we should probably do it in a responsible way. Now, the problem for a lot of operators is, and just like anybody at home, when you try and go buy ingredients that are healthy or clean, generally they're more expensive. So
Correct.
it is easier to eat ultra processed foods because it's cheaper. It's cheaper to give those things to our kids. Free school breakfast and lunch. Those are not very healthy meals. So I'm just looking at myself and like, well, okay, I got to walk the walk then. So we've, over the last couple of months, been looking at moving to beef tallow in our fryers. This was actually also brought to my attention by Chef Gruel, who is a Food Network star judge out in California, has got a restaurant, Calico Fish House. So I'd seen some things on social media that he was cooking more and more with beef tallow. And I'm like, why can't we do this? Why can't we do this? So I said to my vendors, listen, this is what I want to do. And this last week, we made the implementation. And funny enough, we've come into a snag already where our supplier didn't realize that we were going to be going through as much beef tallow. So beef tallow really is just taking the fat. So when we trim our brisket, you can take the fat that's trimmed from the fat cap and you can render that down into beef tallow. And you can use it in a number of things. You could toast your bread with it, which we also do. But it's just very, very healthy. So we've moved.
Were you just like throwing this away before? Like this was just the excess?
Yes.
So you're like recycling.
Yes, exactly. Okay. And that is one of the biggest things that restaurants can do to try and keep their profit margin as big as they can. A lot of people don't understand there's a simple equation that restaurants work on. It's a 30-30-30 rule. 30% of a cost of a burger, say a $10 burger, 30% of that goes to cover the cost of the ingredients, the burger, the bun, the lettuce, the cheese. 30% of that goes to cover the cost of labor, the guy or gal to make it, process it, cook it, serve it. Then 30% goes to cover the overhead, the rent, the utilities, the insurance, all that excess stuff to house everybody and everything to make that burger for you. 30 plus 30 plus 30 is 90.
Wow.
Minus 100 is 10. That's 10 points, 10 percentage points that we get if we're doing everything else correctly. That is our quote unquote profit, right? That's what allows me to be, quote, Scrooge McDuck, like some of these people want to say.
Wow.
That's the equation that every restaurant works on. So we basically have to go through and try and tighten the screws down on every single one of those sectors and hoping that we have that 10 points left over to work with. That's how restaurants make their money. So when we're talking about waste and doing all these other things, paid sick leave and these wages, these are all an affront to this equation that many, many people don't understand. So when they see a cost of a menu item at their favorite diner go up $1 or $2, it's not because that restaurant owner is greedy. It's because the equation has changed. For a breakfast place, my best friend owns a breakfast place, Rise and Dine. If you're in Gaylord, come see them. They're great. They're right on Main Street, just a block away from us. I guarantee they've had to change their menu because egg prices have gotten so outrageous. So it's just all these things put together that's, death by 1,000 cuts. But we just have to minimize some of that. And this is one way to do it, was beef tallow. And it's also healthy. It tastes better. It's going to minimize some of the inflammation in your stomach and in your entire endocrine system, honestly. So that's really where we're going. And honestly, I'm a fan. I've been a fan of RFK Jr. for a while. He's kind of a middle of the road kind of guy.
Yeah.
But when he dropped out of the race and then endorsed Trump, and then Trump said, hey, let's bring along a Tulsi Gabbard, an RFK Jr., an Elon Musk. That's really when I said, boy, this is going to get really interesting really fast.
Yeah.
And if we're going to do this, now's the time to do this and ride this wave of trying to get everybody healthier. Because at the end of the day, if we're healthier, people aren't going to be calling off sick. Yep. People aren't going to be spending money on outrageous health medical bills. So to me, it's all intertwined. Health freedom is freedom, in my opinion.
You are 100% spot on with that assessment of what you just said, because you go back to what you said about inflammation. People don't understand, when you have an inflamed gut, your gut is your brain. That means you're having an inflamed brain. And you look at these kids, you talk about school lunches and breakfasts and all this other stuff, that all causes inflammation. Oh man, my kid can't comprehend things. He's cloudy. He's brain fog. Well, we're just going to label him as ADD and ADHD, and we're going to start medicating him. No, it's what you're feeding your damn kid that's causing all that inflammation. It's like medication is just unplugging the check engine light. Yeah. Why don't you ask that magical question? Why? So I'm so glad that you made that point. Another point, I never knew about the 30-30-30 rule and the 10% put that way. I knew that your guys' it was small margins. But I like how simple that you put it for people like me to understand, like, holy shit, man, like these guys don't have big, broad margins. And I'm kind of witnessing that in my chiropractic clinic, because, inflation's went up 20%. Everything's went up, right? Your utilities, you're cutting your grass, everything, right? So in response, what usually you do is you raise your prices so you can keep the lights on. Well, in my business, we sign contracts with insurance companies. And if I charge a $50 an adjustment, the insurance goes, nah, we're not going to pay you $50. We're going to pay you $38. Then you got to write off the rest. Well, when inflation happened, it's not like the insurance company said, hey, we're going to raise all your allowed amounts 20%. They stayed exactly where they were, and we're just getting hammered. For the first time in 17 years, I had to lay off one of my employees because I just couldn't afford her anymore. It's insane what's going on.
It is insane. And some of these things too, you're kind of subject to market pricing, right? So I've got a bottle of Miller Lite. The guy next door to me, it has a bar, has Miller Lite. You generally have to charge, especially in small towns, you're not going to find a real wide variance of the price of a bottle of Miller Lite or a draft of Miller Lite, maybe 50 cents here or there. But generally these things, we can't go outside so I just got a price raise for all my bud products. First time in years that I've had an across the board bud increase. Can I go and charge an extra 50 cents for a can of Bud Light that somebody can get for 50 cents cheaper next door? So sometimes you really just can't. for us in the barbecue business, we have an excuse to go and say this rack of ribs is worth another $5 than the other guy's rack of ribs because it's cherry wood smoked, it's the Iron Pig, it's blah, 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 all these things, right? So some things are subject to market pricing where other things aren't. But the other thing that when you were saying your story, it reminded me of another thing that people always want to say is when they're tired of subsidizing restaurant workers' wages, these people fundamentally don't understand how the exchange for goods and services for money actually works. Because at the end of the day, when you pay your bill, that's exactly what you're doing is paying employee wages when you pay for a piece of pizza or a cheeseburger. When you go to McDonald's and you get a Big Mac, guess what, fella? You're paying that worker's wages. So this idea that this subsidization, all this crazy stuff, but this is sort of, pardon my French, ignorant. This is how ignorant some of these people are to the idea of how commerce actually works. And they want to just pit small business owners against everybody else or against, I don't know, government workers or unemployed people. I don't really understand where the idea comes from. I have an idea that people that go out and start their own business are somehow an ugly part of society or something.
Yeah.
And I always say, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? If you want to pay employees $25, $30 an hour, whatever a livable wage is, because nobody can ever define that one either. That's you're going to put a business out of business. Like you're saying, you had to lay somebody off. At some point, that business is just going to go away.
Yep.
So it just does not make sense which comes first, the chicken or the egg. You know what I mean? So it just, all of this stuff comes together. And, you know, what's happening in our education system, especially here in Michigan, which is so depressing, this is where these ideas come from, right? You want to sit and you have to listen to what Uncle Sam or Big Daddy government has to say, and you better listen or else. And we now have a generation of children and young adults that I think just buy this stuff hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, they've been indoctrinated ever since they were little, right? And
Absolutely.
that's one of the blessings of COVID is we really started to see during all the Zoom and online learning what was being taught, and people were mortified. Like, what are you teaching my son or daughter? And you know, everything's a blessing. We can always say that. I mean, if Trump would have got in 2020, he would not have been able to do the things that he's doing right now and surround himself with the great cabinet that he has. So it's an exciting time. I want to move into basically what we're talking about now is with Michigan politics. Okay. There is a lot on the line in 2026. I mean, every single day when we wake up, it's like Christmas. What's going on now? How much debt did we get rid of? You know, we got the Epstein list that's going to be released today, and we're excited. People don't understand, especially in the state of Michigan, if we don't keep the House and the Senate at the federal level, all this comes to a screeching halt. And also, all these executive orders that President Trump is signing, Congress needs to get off their asses and put them into law, or they're just going to be gone. And so people just can't pick up their ball and go home right now. It's so important in the state of Michigan, especially in 2026.
Yeah, I have so many conversations just daily about some of this stuff. And
what are you hearing?
Well, I hear so many different things. You know, obviously we've got the Senate race. What I'm trying to make sure that people don't lose sight of, and it's very daunting with Chief Justice Clement stepping down from the Michigan Supreme Court, coming up in April. That court is going to be very, I mean, it is already biased, but I think it's going to be 6-1 after Whitmer appoints whoever is going to replace Clement. I think there's going to be 2 seats, potentially maybe more, come around for 2026. There is an opportunity to flip that court, but I think all 4 seats that will be available have to be turned. And that's monumental considering the ground that the Republicans have lost in that arena. We went from a Republican Michigan Supreme Court in 2020 with in-recertified questions. That, to me, in my opinion, was the last good ruling that Supreme Court, Michigan Supreme Court, made, and has been deleterious ever since, in my opinion. So that's one I'm trying to constantly make sure that people are going to be focused on. That's the world I'm coming from. I've got an open case in the Court of Appeals against our local health department challenging health state laws. I have a new lawsuit just filed on Friday here in Otsego County with 4 other property owners in Otsego County challenging the Michigan Public Service Commission and Public Act 233 as a non-delegation violation. These are all things that probably will go to the Michigan Supreme Court at some point in time. Given this current court, we don't see real great outcomes. No matter how good these arguments are, that court has a lot of power. That court is what gave us the legislation from the bench, in my opinion, with the paid sick leave and wage law that ultimately Congress ended up garbling up anyways and sending back out to the governor to sign, which I guarantee will have a challenge from the One Fair Wage organization. They will come in and they will try and challenge the new wage law that was signed last week. Yeah. That's really what I'm focusing on. But, we had a brief conversation beforehand about the open Senate seat. I'm hearing Mike Rogers may jump into that one too. I know you mentioned briefly John James. I have a lot of conversations about governor. I've had a couple of conversations, people asking me to run for governor.
I've seen that.
I haven't said no, but the very same person that told me the love versus fear story also said, basically, listen, he's discouraged me from running for any office since all of this went down, because plenty of people, that's their first thing. Well, you should run for office. You should run for office.
Yep.
And we started looking at it and I said, listen, I've had more of an impact from the private sector doing what I'm doing with lawfare. And I don't love that term, but people understand it now. With the lawfare side of it, I've had more impact with unconstitutional rulings than I ever could have if I had run as a state rep or run for a Senate position, which I never would because Michelle Hoytang is awesome. Or even the governor position, I've had more success effectuating change from the private sector than I think I could have in government. Government moves really slow. And I don't know that I would be able to, I don't know if I'd be happy in that scenario, because private sector, we get to work as fast as we want, more or less.
I want to elaborate on that because I think a lot of people need to hear that. Everyone has a role. Everyone has a skill set. And what I see time and time again is people will outkick their punt coverage. They've never been in politics. They don't own a business and they say, I'm going to run for governor. And I'm like, no, you can't. There's everybody has a role. You don't have to be the one holding the flag out in front. Just like you said, Ian, you are gaining more headway with what you're doing and inspiring even more change than you probably could as governor right now, because you are fighting the good fight. You're getting things changed at the judicial level, which is obviously much needed. And that's why I'm sitting this one out. Is I don't know if I'll ever run for office again, because I really like doing what we're doing now, is bringing a light to a situation.
Yeah.
And then getting behind good people that would be good governors, state reps, and senators and everything else. And you just don't have to think that you have to run. Thank you for making that point, because a lot of people need to hear that. And if you want to run for politics, that's great. Hey, that's why we live in the greatest country in the history of our species. Right. Anyone can be president, but you have to acquire that skill set along the way. Who knows, after you do this, right, 8 to 10 years of you battling, you're going to have such a good understanding of exactly how everything happens. Holy cow, brother. I mean, you should probably go be an attorney, go back to school. But if you think about it, that's when you could possibly run and you have all that knowledge and understanding, and then you can make an impact.
Yeah, I have never had much of an interest in politics. I've always been adjacent to it because I do find it fascinating, this ruling class, and there's just kind of the rest of us. I've always been fascinated about what happens to people, good people, when they do get into politics and get swallowed up by, Lansing, so to speak. It is an interesting, it's disgusting the amount of money that it takes to be involved in these things, which better than I do. But it ultimately came down to the fact that I had been able to do more from this seat than I could from another seat. And I think that the executive branch needs to be looked at in it from a different point of view. And if I were to run again, it's very highly unlikely that I would even consider. And if I did, it would be more to help direct a conversation. Because some of the stuff we're seeing coming out of Michigan politics right now with, the stuff with Shriver and some of this other nonsense, it's kind of like, y'all need to get focused. Stop effing around.
We got to talk about that because
like
I got lit up yesterday for coming on and say, you know what? I can give two shits about gay people.
I saw your tweet. Yeah. And I agree with it.
You can't. You're giving the Democrats, they're so underwater. They can barely keep their head above water with all that because they double down on the radical ideologies. Why would you even give them that soundbite right now? Don't die on that hill.
Right.
It's like
it's the second best thing that he could have said besides trying to overturn abortion in Michigan.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm just,
what are you doing?
People, they cut their nose off to spite their face. And I'm like, you guys have no strategy. There's no long term. You're all emotion. You're no logic. It drives me insane.
Yeah. And it just, I'm hoping that people are paying attention to that and are realizing how foolish that was. And for other people that are trying to attack you for your personal viewpoint on that, I think is also part of the problem.
Yeah.
Because why is Garrett Soldano not allowed to have this opinion?
Yeah.
And this to me is like, it's one of these dumbass purity tests.
Yeah.
Like just knock it off. Right.
Yep.
Like this is another reason why I've said for a while, I don't necessarily identify as a Republican because I'm relatively pro-choice. I don't care. Keep me out of that conversation. Government shouldn't be in the bedroom, period. So I don't even want to have that conversation. That's your decision. You do whatever. And the purity folks just aren't having it. And it's kind of like, listen, you got to open up that book a little bit more. That tent's got to be a little bit bigger. You know what? It's 2025 and you're trying to bring up gay marriage. Sit down.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let the adults have the microphone and the conversations because you shouldn't even be talking about any of this. This is old news. Just honestly, it made me think for a moment that Josh Shriver was like a Democratic plant. Like, what are you doing? Like, this is just, it's idiotic. And then you're not even going to have the fortitude to take questions on your own silly resolution, which resolutions are resolutions anyway. So it's just kind of like, why are you distracting?
Yeah. 100%. All right. Thank you for bringing that up because I'm just like, there's no strategy. And that's what I'm hoping the Michigan GOP can at least do. And I always give people a shot. Like if you get voted in, I'm going to give you a shot. Let's see what you got. I gave Christina Caroma a shot. I will give everyone a shot to see what you have to do. But I will also hold your ass accountable if 7, 8, 9 months in, you're not doing the job. And the Michigan GOP, it's a business. You better be fundraising. You better be getting on message, and you better be getting a ground game that's going to be needed. If you fail in those milestones, you are failing as a CEO, and your ass should be replaced. That's just true.
It absolutely is true. And what I'm trying to advocate for anybody that is looking to jump into the executive branch, running for governor, is you've got to stay within your bounds. The Constitution directly says what you can and you cannot do. And we have a perfect example over the last 6 to 7 years of a person in that position that has taken more power than was legally given to her. And the Supreme Court even said it back in 2020. And 3 days later, she turned to another executive branch agency and did it again. So I am telling anybody that is considering running for governor, you've got to stay within your bounds. And listen, you work for us. It's not the other way around. We've got to stop considering anybody in the ruling class as better than us because they're not. We are hiring them for a job. People need to go back and read literally like the first sentence of Michigan's Constitution. We, the people, give these powers, not the other way around. The governor for years has top-downed us, right? This is what I say how you're going to live, and this is how it's going to be. Constitution be damned, Congress be damned. This is what I want. And we've got to get somebody in there that just fundamentally says, I'm one of three very important parts of this government. And I pledge to execute the laws passed by Congress and that are interpreted by the judicial branch. It's literally just that simple. Take a step back from all the hoopla, all the nonsense that we saw with the state of the state last night and all this pomp and circumstance. I went down to that event a couple of years ago, and it's just kind of gross. You stand in this great big room and it's so fancy and all, and that's our money, Garrett. That's our money that is funding all of this stuff. And they completely have forgotten who they work for. And we just need to gently remind them, you guys work for us.
Amen.
That's
brother.
how it is. And I feel like Trump is sort of doing that a little bit from the federal level. He's saying, yeah, this is what you guys said you wanted done. You want the Epstein list. You want no tips on or no taxes on tips. All these things. Close the border. He's doing the will of the people, and we need a governor that's kind of going to go along that same route.
Amen. Yeah, I agree 100%. And you're right. Whenever I go to any political event, I need a shower. Like, I feel like disgusting. Like, I literally need to come home and take a shower because it's not my jam. I come from very humble beginnings, man. I was raised in a trailer park for the first quarter of my life. Not the quarter, but the first 9 years of my life. And my mom was a school bus driver. My dad was in the Michigan Army National Guard. And, I've seen what it takes to be successful, and I have those values and everything else. And I just, that crowd is just not me. It's not. And it never will be. That's for sure.
It's a weird environment to be in. A few people had asked if I was going to be at the GOP convention this last weekend. And I was just like, no, I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. I know plenty of those people. Some people wanted me to come to see if they could convince me to try and jump in the governor's race. But again, like you said, I don't love that environment. I'm more, what I like to do is, gosh, how do I even want to put this? I never wanted to be the face of my business. Let me put it that way. I was always happy to prop up this organization, the Iron Pig, or any business that I've worked for or ran or started. That has always, it's never been about me. I prefer to lift up the team, and I fundamentally have a hard time getting around the idea of lifting up one person. Like, to me, that's how, people say things to me about, this legacy that you've left. And I just kind of look at them weird. I'm like, legacy? Like, okay. I'm like, that was never in the matrix of any of this. All I wanted to do was pay my damn employees before Christmas and not force them to have to go on unemployment and not be able to have a nice Christmas or pay their bills, pay their heating bills because they're forced to go on it. Like, that's the only reason I did this. Not because I wanted to be some, right-wing restaurateur, out there making news. No, it just so happens that principle thrust me out there. And now I have this weird platform to be able to kind of say whatever I want. And I wouldn't say that I can do whatever I want, but it gives me the ability to do things like create a bourbon brand and the idea of franchising the Iron Pig and buying another location and all of these things. That is what I love. And that's really the reason why all of this has even taken place, is because I said, no, not while I have breath. And if we go out of business in 6 months, this is my thinking back in November of 2020. I said to my wife, I don't know. I can't do this. I can't shut down the business. I just can't. I can't not pay these bills. I can't not pay my employees. I can't sleep at night doing this. So if we do this and we still go out of business 6 months, 3 months down the road, or the government sues us into oblivion, at least I did everything in my power at that time to do what I can for the people that I love. And that's really what it was. And now I find myself, on a podcast with Garrett, a dude that ran for governor last time, who happened to be in my restaurant, having a restaurant. So, it's a crazy set of circumstances I never thought I'd be in, but yet here we are, and let's make the most of it, I suppose.
Absolutely. If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. You mentioned something that I
Yeah.
definitely want to talk about is I got a little picture, the bourbon. I mean, that thing looks elite, brother. I love it.
Yeah, I've tasted some of it. It's 101 proof Kentucky bourbon made in Kentucky. It's sitting in casks in Kentucky right now, ready to be bottled up. So the last thing that we're doing is kind of finalizing some of the branding, the labels for the bottle. We got bottles picked out and everything. We've named it Gaylord Gold. So really we're just putting the finishing touches on it, which is really just the labels and some of the final verbiage and everything. But yeah, I mean, did I think 5 years ago when we started this that, the Iron Pig would be coming out with a line of bourbon? No, heck no.
Can we go into that? How does that all work? Like, so it's in Kentucky. Like, what entails that bourbon? Like, how does
So
it? I don't even know where to start.
we've got a bottling company down on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So if anybody that loves bourbon, go do the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. It's amazing. So many distilleries to style. You'll learn so much, taste so many wonderful different bourbons. And what my partner did is he actually went down, spent a week on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, a couple of different distilleries. And there are companies that do this. They will help you create your own, whether it's just your own personal, or if you're legitimately trying to create a bourbon to sell at retail, which is what we're doing. They will help you go through that entire process. You can mix, a rye bourbon blend. And that's essentially what we did is went down to Kentucky, created our own blend. Again, we're calling it Gaylord Gold, and it's very gold in hue, very light colored. And I tested our 101 proof against a 90 proof rye mix, and our 101 proof is smoother than that 90 proof rye bourbon mix. It's incredible. It's the smoothest 100 proof alcohol I've ever tried in my life. And people are saying 100 proof. Wow, that's hot.
It's gonna light your butt on fire.
But you tasting it, you would never know. I mean, so you think of other 100 proof alcohols and you're just kind of like, whoo, that's, breathing out flames. This stuff is so incredibly smooth. I don't know how they've done it. I'm sure it's the white cedar casks or whatever the heck that they're using. It's amazing is what I'm saying. So they help us do all this stuff. They have bottles that we pick from. They help with labeling. So that's really where we're at, is taking this Iron Pig thing to the next level, because not everybody can get to Little Gaylord, Michigan, all the way up in the northern lower peninsula, right off exit 279, 282. We have 2 locations.
That's right.
IronPigSmoke.com. I just would have never thought that any of this would have ever been possible, but people want to participate in what we're doing, and they feel like this is a way that they can help and be a part of this movement that we've created over the last 4 or 5 years. And again, it blows my mind that somebody would even come to me and say, "Hey, we want to buy the rights for the Iron Pig name to put it on bourbon, and let's go sell cases and cases of Iron Pig bourbon." I'm like, absolutely 100%, because we sell our barbecue sauce that we make right in the restaurant, and we're able to scale that very easily. But doing liquor is very different, obviously, because there's licensing and all kinds of other issues when you get into the liquor business. So that's what we're finalizing right now, is those details, mainly with the label and then with licensing, so we can get that available, not just to sell in the restaurant, but to sell at retail around the state, and then hopefully, around the country.
I knew Ian when he was just risking it for the brisket. That's going to be my thing. When this, because I feel that this is going to just take off for your brother. Like the brand that you guys have, the Gaylord Gold. I mean, that's all good stuff, man. And you built this. I think it's going to do very well, brother. I really do. And I'm beyond excited for you. You deserve every amount of success coming your way and more. Okay. You truly do. You fought the good fight, continue to fight the good fight, and stand up for not only your business, your employees, but brother, you're standing up for the people who can't stand up for themselves. And man, that means a lot to a lot of people out there.
It's hard to turn a blind eye when you see injustice that you know that you can help with. And myself, and listen, I have to give so much credit to my attorney, David Delaney. This dude is amazing. You know, you mentioned it a bit ago about, you know, breaking it down or becoming an attorney. We've always joked since the beginning of this that I've got to be able to explain it to the guy or gal on the other side of the bar. And law is never easy to do.
Correct.
Especially when it comes into such an emotional issue like COVID and some of these other things and minimum wage. And now we're entering the avenue of solar. We need to call them industrial solar plants, but solar developments right here in Otsego County. We know that's happening around the state. We've got a remedy to stop this government overreach, this top-down approach to citing these developments. You know, this guy is brilliant. He can take something and he can look at it and he can go, yeah, you know what? We've got a case here. We can fight this. You know, there's a case over in Traverse City where a hair salon posted something on their Facebook page, their business Facebook page.
I talked with her. Yep.
Yeah, Christine Geiger. I know Christine well, and she reached out to me and said, hey, listen, the Department of Civil Rights is coming after me for a Facebook post. Now, you don't have to agree with what she posted on her Facebook, her business Facebook page. But she never denied service to anybody. She basically, real quick, what she did, she put a post out saying, you know, if you identify as anything other than a man or a woman, please seek services somewhere else, like a pet groomer.
Yeah.
She never denied service to a single human being, not once. Nobody ever came into her salon and said, I identify as Meow Meow the cat. Please give me a cat's haircut. She never denied service, none of that. She basically took her freedom of speech and freedom of religion to Facebook and posted that. Three people came out of the woodwork, filed Department of Civil Rights fines and levies against her, and brought the power of the state down on her for her free speech and freedom of religion. She reached out and said, hey, these guys are attacking me. You know, can you help? Sent it over to my attorney. We started talking about it, this, that, and the other. Come to find out, there is something that we can do because the Department of Civil Rights hasn't identified what non-binary means or gender or some of these other things. So again, they wrote a terrible law. And that's what the Michigan Public Service Commission has done. They wrote a terrible law. That's what they did with the minimum wage and paid sick leave. They wrote another terrible law. So if my role, I suppose, if we can call it that now, is to take these injustices that people bring forward and somehow try and litigate them through lawfare or whatever it happens to be, then I suppose that's my role now. And I'm happy to take that on because we've had a bit of success doing it. And people are grateful for everything that we're standing for and standing up against because they feel like they couldn't do it alone. And that's one thing I learned early on is when one person stands up, it gives permission for other people to do the same. And they don't feel like they're alone. And I feel like that's what we're on the cusp of right now is people starting to feel like they have the power again. And that's why we need to perpetuate that idea moving forward is we, the people, do have all the power. And we need to take it back from the ruling class that seems to just want to lord over us with all these silly things.
The power of one can lead to the power of many. You're exactly right.
Yes,
brother.
Sir.
Thank you so much for coming on today. We got to have you back, man. So
anytime.
In a couple months, when more people throw their hat in the ring, let's get into some Michigan politics and analyze who's running. We're going to talk about the success of your bourbon because I know it's going to go off very well. I will be buying my own bottle when I get up there. That's for sure.
I'll save you one for sure.
Oh, I appreciate it, man. God bless you, brother. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thanks, Garrett. I appreciate you. Appreciate everything you do with the Grassroots Army, buddy. Keep it up.
Yes, sir. Awesome. Man, I love Ian. Guy's awesome. Gosh, I'm just excited for his success. Excited for all the success that's coming his way. Just a fantastic human being, just a living, breathing example of the American dream and what can happen when you put your mind towards something. So I will continue to bring great people on and have those conversations. We covered a lot. It was a great show today, and I hope you guys enjoyed it just as much as I enjoyed giving it. All right. Until next time, God bless you. God bless the state of Michigan. Of course, and always, God bless these United States.